welcome to the Brewers season preview edition of the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. My name is Hunter Baumgardt, your host. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HunterBeOnAir. You can also like the Facebook page, Hunter Baumgardt Sports. Remember, you can watch or listen to the podcast. You can watch on YouTube and listen on SoundCloud. Simply search Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast and feel free to subscribe there as well. Well, opening day for the Milwaukee Brewers is coming up on Friday, 6:10, Wrigley Field. They're finally going to take the field against the Chicago Cubs, and this 60-game season is going to get underway. We waited over 120 days. It's getting towards 130 days now. Might even be over that by this point. How many days since sports stopped, and specifically baseball stopped? Now we only just have a few until we see the Brewers take the field in a game that matters. And these inter-squad scrimmages, if you haven't been watching these inter-squad scrimmages on Brewers.com, I highly recommend them. It's been fascinating to watch and see this blue versus gold World Series and, of course, exhibition games as well. So hope you've enjoyed all of that as we lead up to this opening day. Today, we've got a podcast filled with 5 different guests of 5 different thoughts on different aspects of this 2020 Milwaukee Brewers team. We're going to talk about the infield. We're going to talk about the DH. We're going to talk about pitching. We're going to talk about win total projection. We're talking about the competition in the NL Central with 5 different guests, including Dave Carney, who's the morning show host at WKTY, including Grant Bilse, who's the Wisco Sports Show host at WKTY, Marc Carstens, who is a sports radio show host at RAQ Radio during college. He recently just graduated from UWL, and also he worked at WKTY as well. Also, a couple guys from reviewingthebrew.com. They write constant Brewers content, and David Gasper is going to join us from that website. And also, Matt Carroll is going to make his debut on the podcast as well, and they both write for reviewingthebrew.com. So excited to get you all these different takes. I'm going to ask them all different questions and see what we come up with. And at the end, I'll give you my take as well on this 2020 Brewers season. So let's get to our first guest. It is Grant Bilse, and let's start this Brewers 2020 season preview. Joining us first here on the Brewers season preview edition of the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast is the host of the Wisco Sports Show on WKTY in La Crosse, Grant Bilse. You can follow him on Twitter at KeystrokerGrant. Listen to the Wisco Sports Show from 5 to 6 each weekday on WKTY in La Crosse. And Grant, good to talk to you again. Last time we talked here on the podcast was when basically every sport was postponed or canceled back in like late March. So it's nice that we're getting very, very close to Brewers opening day. It's kind of surreal, isn't it?
Yeah, we've come full circle. I almost forgot about that. It feels weird to think back to what we were doing at the beginning of this pandemic, because we have definitely changed our attitude and our approach and our opinions on everything over the last couple months. It feels so long ago.
It does. And so I'm guessing you are as excited as I to get sports back underway, especially baseball in the summertime. So how excited are you to have the Brewers back on TV and radio? And then, of course, hosting a talk show, a sports talk show in Wisconsin. You're probably excited that the sports team is actually going to be playing.
Yeah, it's weird. Months ago, I felt desperate. When sports shut down, I'm like, we got to get sports back. And I felt desperate. And as a radio host, I've almost started to accept talking about sports every day without sports. Like I've had to teach myself and learn how to have a conversation about sports that don't include talking about actual games and stats and numbers. And that's been interesting. It's certainly been different. But like Hunter, you remember like the All-Star break used to be a nightmare for sports radio and sports TV. Like 4 days without anything. What are we going to do? Well, we're going on soon to be 4.5 months since March 11th, that Wednesday night. So we're the All-Star break's going to be nothing going forward. We're gonna love the All-Star break. 4 days without sports, that's gonna be easy. As a fan, I might be more excited to get baseball back than any other sport. And maybe it's just because of the timing, because the NBA, it almost feels like the season ended and we're starting a new season. So mentally, I'm kind of in between seasons. I haven't really had to confront the mortality of the NFL season yet, and we're going to have to in the next couple of weeks. So my brain really hasn't switched over yet. Baseball still feels like we're waiting on opening day. So it just feels like the suspense has only grown. And I miss baseball. I miss the routine. I miss having Bob Uecker and Brian Anderson and The Rock and just having that game every day to turn on or to listen to. And I miss having a box score every day and the ebb and flow of 3 and 4 game series and homestands and road trips. I'm excited to have that routine back in my life because it kind of feels like we've been wandering in the wilderness the last couple of months.
Absolutely, completely agree. And I think for a lot of sports fans, it is that routine. It is that normalcy, as everybody is calling it. Getting back to our new normal. But it's the normalcy of seeing the Brewers on TV or listening to them on the radio that you mentioned. I do want to get into a couple specific things, mainly focused on the lineup because I think this is going to be really interesting. And I want to start with the DH. Obviously, it's implemented in the NL this year. Something we haven't seen the Brewers have, a DH in our lifetime except for interleague play. So I'm curious, Ryan Braun's obviously everybody's fitting him into the DH role, but do you see some other guys that could contribute well in this DH role as Counsell puts together his lineup?
Well, I think Braun is the first instinct most Brewers fans have, and we're going to talk about the lineup in a second. And Braun, I think, will probably start as the DH, but the designated hitter can serve a few different roles, and it just depends on the player and the situation. Like the DH can be an extra bat. That would be the case with Ryan Braun. Like they have a very deep outfield, Yelich, Kane, probably Avi Garcia. And the DH can serve as a vehicle to get Ryan Braun into the lineup without having to take one of those other 3 excellent outfielders out of the lineup. So it can be an extra bat. It can be driven by health, right? For example, the DH this season could be a great way to get Christian Yelich a day off without giving him a day off. And I think that's a really strong possibility given how well Ben Gamel has been playing. And I know it's just spring training and it's just exhibition games, but let's be real. That's all we have to go off of. By all indications, he's been playing really well. So if Ben Gamel continues to play well, then Craig Counsell can comfortably take Christian Yelich and put him in that DH spot, which allows him to stay healthier and stay fresher. And I don't know how many games Christian Yelich is going to be able to take off in a 60-game season. So they could go that way. They could also use it to hide a bad defender. I don't know if this is a huge problem the Brewers have. Keston Hiura is a natural fit if that's the route they decide to go, assuming they find someone to play second. Really, Hunter, the way that the DH is going to be decided, it's going to be governed by the Brewers' depth pieces. Sogard, Healy, Narvaez, Holt, Gamel, Smoke. Whichever one of those players is playing well, they will design and set up the DH to fit accordingly, if that makes sense. I think it'll start as Ryan Braun, but Craig Counsell won't be afraid to change it very quickly if they need to. It's only 60 games. You don't have time to mess around.
Right, exactly. And I think there'll be a bunch of different players that are put into that role, and it'll be interesting to see what he does. As far as the lineup, and you mentioned that, let's look at some options of how Counsell could put together. If you were to go through and make an opening day lineup, as opening day is coming up on Friday against the Cubs, what would your opening? Because there's just so many players, it feels like, on this team that could fit in so many different places. So how do you choose, the best at each position? And so what would kind of be your opening day lineup, do you think?
Well, until we get some games played, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on Brock Holt or Omar Narvaez or Ryan Healy. Like, I'm going to learn about these guys as Brewer fans learn about them as we see them play, because we didn't really have a spring training. And I get they're playing exhibition games right now, but I don't really know what we can take away from exhibition games. So I'm not going to pretend to know really well all these pieces they've brought in. But if I had to guess, this is what I think the opening day lineup would probably be like. I think they'll probably continue to bat Lorenzo Cain leadoff. I don't know if that's the best idea, but I think that'll be the starting point. I think it'll go Cain. I would put Braun in the 2 spot, and I would assume that he's going to probably DH because I want Christian Yelich in the 3 spot. Christian Yelich had so many home runs last year. His numbers, production-wise, his batting average, his hits, doubles, home runs, didn't lead to as many RBIs as they should. Like, if Christian Yelich is hitting 50 home runs a year, his RBI numbers better be pretty high. The problem was he was hitting so many solo homers in that 2 spot. I think you need Christian Yelich in the 3 hole. After that, I'd stick Keston Hiura in the cleanup spot. Keston Hiura needs to be great this year. Like, he can no longer be an exciting prospect, right, or a fun story. Like, he needs to step up and be what Mike Moustakas or Yasmani Grandal was last year. If the Brewers want to contend, right, that's a non-negotiable for me. He needs to be great. So I think Counsell should show he has confidence and expectations in here and put him in that 4 spot. After that, it gets a little hairy, but this is what my guess would be. I would put Justin Smoke in that 5 hole. And I think he could kind of play the Casey McGee role, like, if that makes sense. Like, not good enough to be a leadoff hitter, but still is high enough up there. So
has
like
some power,
with Justin Smoke, power. Maybe not great at getting on base, but not good enough to be a 4 hitter. So you make him the 5. Avi Garcia fits in there somewhere. I think he could be a natural 6 or a 7 hitter. Manny Pena as well. Garcia and Pena might be flipped around. I think 8-9. probably goes. RC is going to be your 9-hitter. So if you reverse it from there,
Yeah.
I would guess that Eric Sogard is going to be
Mm-hmm.
their 8-hitter and filling in whatever position they're missing. He
Mm-hmm.
might not be in the lineup every day, but the Brewers are familiar with him.
Yeah.
And they like him enough to bring him back. So I think he'll
Mm-hmm.
get first crack at it. I think he'll get first chance to fill in one of those infield spots. And if he doesn't play well, it might be 2 or 3 games and he's done, right? They might move on just like that to Holt
That's
or
true.
Healy or somebody else. But I think it'll start with Sogard. So I think the roster is going to, and the batting order is going to look something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually glad you made me think about this and get thoughts down on paper, because now I'm just going to use this for my show tonight, and it'll be fun because, I can talk with listeners and we can try to spitball and maybe guess what that batting order on opening days like. And it'll be an experience, a learning experience for Brewers fans, because we've never had to think about the DH before.
Exactly.
We've only had to think about 8 spots on the batting order, and then you just fill in a pitcher. Putting a DH in there that you can move top to bottom changes a couple of things. So I'm glad you made me start to think about this, because it's something I've been putting off all summer.
Yes. Well, and finally with opening day coming right around the corner, it's fun to think about this stuff. And when you said, who's going to be 8 and 9, I immediately thought, oh, the pitcher's 9, so RC has to be 8. No, we're going to have RC at 9 and then see what happens with the 8 spot. So good points. And like you said, definitely listen to Grant's show 5 to 6 each weekday on WKTY in La Crosse. If you're not in La Crosse, you can listen online, WKTYsports.com, or download the WKTY app. Yes, exactly. Grant, appreciate the time. Go Brewers. We're excited. Sports are coming back soon here.
Yeah, Hunter, and enjoy this next week as we get ready for the season, and go Brewers. Amen, brother.
That is Grant Bilse. Once again, you can find him on Twitter at KeystrokerGrant, and be sure to listen to him on the Wisco Sports Show from 5 to 6 each weekday on WKTY in La Crosse. Next, I want to get to a really fun guest that we've had on before on the podcast. That is David Gasper. He writes for ReviewingTheBrew.com. Let's get his take on the 2020 Brewers. Joining us next here on the Brewers season preview episode of the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast is a guy I love talking Brewers with. David Gasper is joining us, and you've seen him before on the podcast. He's the editor-in-chief at ReviewingTheBrew.com. You can find his work there, a website dedicated to all things Brewers. And we're actually going to talk to his another guy who works at the website, Matt Carroll, coming up in just a little bit. But you can find him, David Gasper, on Twitter at DGasper24. David, really appreciate the time, and I'm really excited to talk Brewers, actual baseball, and opening day.
Yeah, appreciate you having me, and it's finally just about here. Baseball's getting ready to get started, and we've waited way too long for it.
Yes, way too long is right, with the saga and of course the pandemic as well. So I want to first ask you, I've seen, I know you've been watching a bunch of these scrimmages with the Blue versus the Gold World Series that they got going on at the intra-squad scrimmages. I'm curious, what has stood out to you so far, and can we take anything from the scrimmages, and use that to help us predict what's going to happen when we get to actual games, on opening day against the Cubs on Friday?
Yeah, the scrimmages have been fun. They've been interesting. For the most part, there hasn't been a whole lot of offense in these scrimmages. They've been like mostly pitching duels, with kind of a couple of big home runs here or there, which on one hand is great for the pitching staff that a lot of people have been worried about, because pitching staff is looking pretty good. They're holding a lot of really good hitters down. But at the same time, your offense doesn't seem to be moving that well. So it's really kind of a weird balance that you have to strike when you're playing against yourself in those scrimmages. But I mean, for the most part, the scoring has really just been from the long ball. And over the past couple of years, the Brewers offense really is kind of centered around the home run ball. It's not really a lot of small ball and rallies and things like that. So I think that's something that we could see continuing once again in 2020, where most of the offense, the run scoring is centered around, getting a guy or two on and hitting a home run. I mean, they got guys like Logan Morrison, who hit a home run yesterday. Justin Smoke's been hitting some home runs. Ben Gamel has a power stroke now. Like, I mean, they got some thumpers in that lineup, and when they get all of them going, it should be good. And the pitching staff has been looking good so far, keeping some of these guys off balance, especially Christian Yelich, who's still trying to find his timing.
Exactly. He is. And one of the pitchers that I think is been really, impressive so far. And I saw you wrote a piece the other day titled All Aboard the Corbin Burns Hype Train, which I think is very, which is very, it's very relevant. And I think it's a good point because Corbin Burns obviously looked good. But I think it's interesting. What makes you so high on Corbin Burns coming into this season, knowing how much he struggled last year?
Yeah, I've always been high on Corbin Burns,
Yeah.
ever since he was drafted through his prospect days, and I was super high on him last year, and he fell flat, and a lot of people have not been afraid to remind me of that. But I still believe in Corbin Burns. He's got the stuff, man, to be a frontline starting pitcher in this league for years to come. He's got the size, he's got the velocity. He was pumping 98 miles an hour with his fastball, 98,
Mhm.
99 with his fastball in the scrimmage the other day. So his off-speed stuff, his slider is ridiculous. He can hit 93, 94 with his slider and still get the downward movement, the sliding movement on the pitch. And like he's got 4 or 5 pitches. He's got really just kind of every single ingredient that you need for a frontline starting pitcher. And I
Mhm.
mean, he took the struggles last year, and I mean, he was talking with a sports psychologist, and he was, changing his mindset, changing how he was kind of going about approaching a game day, a day that he's going to start,
Mhm.
kind of getting himself into more of a routine. He's kind of centering his arsenal now around his slider instead of his fastball, which is good because his fastball is what got him into trouble last year. He
Mhm.
couldn't command it in the zone, and he ended up leaving it kind of right down the pipe, and that's when he ended up being susceptible to the long ball. So in the scrimmages in spring training, he looked like he had regained command of that fastball. He looked refreshed basically, and he looks like ready to go frontline type starter again.
Mhm.
He's got all those ingredients there, and he's not missing like he was in 2019.
Exactly. And I think that there's a lot of Brewers fans that are excited to see what he can do. And especially if you pair him with how good Brandon Woodruff has been last year. And, obviously, is so far in the scrimmages as well. And I think you have a really good pair. We've got David Gasper joining me. You can follow him on Twitter at dgasper24. Final thing. So just keeping on this pitching staff idea here, who do you see as your 5 starters? How do you think they'll work specifically Corey Knebel in? Because obviously he's coming back from the injury. Hasn't pitched in a game, if I'm correct, since 2018 was the last time he pitched in like a game that counted. So, do you think he'll come back and be the closer eventually this year? What is kind of your thought on Corey Knebel and then the pitching staff and the starters as a whole?
Yeah, so Knebel, I think he's going to get himself back into the back end of the bullpen.
Hmm.
I don't know if they're going to start him there right away. They could be trying to work his way back in. I think also Craig Counsell will just kind of utilize matchups and not really have a specific set closer. I
Hmm.
think it'll be some situations he'll use Josh Hader, some situations he'll use Knebel, and they'll just kind of see where everything lines up when you get to later in the game, and just kind of figure it out that way. I don't think they're going to have one specific set guy as their ninth inning closer this year, like they had to do last year when Knebel was out and Jeffress wasn't at his previous levels,
Yeah.
and they were strictly down to Josh Hader as that sole top relief arm out there. But now they have Knebel back. They've got David Phelps. They've got guys like Drew Rasmussen waiting in the wings. They've got a really good group back there that they could really kind of rotate through a whole bunch of guys as their best options in the ninth inning, as opposed to only having Josh Hader as the only decent option for that. And then for the starting rotation, I think it's going to start off Brandon Woodruff,
Hmm.
opening day starter. It's lined up that way. Craig Counsell still hasn't said it, but it's pretty much a given at this point.
Yeah.
And then he's going to be followed by some combination of Adrian Hauser, Brett Anderson, and Josh Lindblom, provided that
Hmm.
Anderson's blister doesn't prove to
Yeah.
be a problem to prevent him from pitching that opening series. And then I think Corbin Burns gets that fifth starter spot. I mean, he's been
Okay.
pitching extremely well. He pitched well in spring. He's pitching well now. And Freddie Peralta got his start yesterday in game 3. of the Blue Gold series. And Peralta gave up a couple of first inning hits and then a 3-run homer to Logan Morrison. He settled down a little bit afterwards, but those first inning issues appear to still be plaguing Freddie Peralta. So given how dominant Burnes was over 4 innings, going 12 up, 12 down, 7 strikeouts, no walks, like as good as you can do it. And then Peralta struggling again in the first inning and, still trying to figure it out a little bit. I think Corbin Burnes has the edge over him. Eric Lauer has still been out of action, trying to return from the COVID-related injured list. So I think Burnes is the guy in the 5th starter spot right now. And it's going to be those 4 guys, Woodruff, Hauser, Anderson, and Lindblom, that are going to be filling those first spots in the rotation.
Exactly. No, I think I agree with you. And I think Eric Lauer is a guy who can watch maybe to enter it later in the year. But like you said, it's so unknown when he'll come back, how these COVID related, injuries, so to speak, they're not injuries, but once you have COVID, there's hoops you have to jump through to get back on the field. So I think it's going to be, these people are going to be out longer than maybe anticipated. But David, really appreciate the time, and I always love getting your thoughts on the Brewers. And I'm excited that we have some Brewers baseball coming back at Wrigley Field on Friday. Yeah.
Thanks for having me, man. And really excited to finally talk some baseball and have some actual games to talk about. It's good to be back for sure.
Yes, no doubt about that. Thanks so much. That is David Gasper. Again, you can find his work at reviewingthebrew.com. He does fantastic work there. He's the editor-in-chief of the website, so I highly suggest checking out his work, and always got really interesting Brewers news and also opinions and just kind of different rankings and stuff like that, like he mentioned. So I highly suggest checking him out there. You can also follow him on Twitter at dgasper24. Let's get back to another person from WKTY, Dave Carney. He is the morning show host at WKTY. And let's get his take on how this Brewers season will go. Joining me next on the Brewers season preview edition of the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast is Dave Carney. He's the host at WKTY of the morning show on WKTY in La Crosse. You can follow him on Twitter at DapperDaveC. Dave, I'm excited to get you back on the podcast and today talk some Milwaukee Brewers. So how are you today?
Man, I'm so excited to be back on the podcast, especially after you went national. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah, of course. So you've got a really nice view there, taking in the nice summer day. I think we all need, love the view of the outside right now.
It's so much a part of me, and being that it is the summertime, we have to soak it in as much as we can. I'm at the recovery room on 7th Street in Mississippi, right near Viterbo College in La Crosse, and it's beautiful out today. I love these guys. They're fantastic. The food is amazing.
There you go. Awesome. What a great way to spend a day. So we've got, speaking of summer, baseball is finally going to be back here on Friday as the Brewers starting against the Cubs at Wrigley Field. I want to ask you first, do you think this Brewers team is better equipped or worse off with this shortened season playing 60 games instead of the full 162?
So I think they're better off, actually. I think that the way that David Stearns and Craig Counsell have constructed this team and how Craig Counsell manages the baseball team, Hunter, I think it actually works really well for a 60-game season. When you've got pitchers, especially up-and-coming pitchers like Corbin Burnes, who had a real nice outing in the blue versus gold just a couple of days ago, Josh Hader, possibly Corey Knebel in the rotation, Justin Jeffress continues to impress and get, not Jeffress, excuse me, but Freddie Peralta continues to get better as he goes on to his career. And Brandon Woodruff, I'm excited. The depth that Milwaukee has this year, and we talked about it on the morning show a couple of days back, the depth that the Brewers have this year is about as good as it's been for this team as long as I can remember. And I think that in a shortened season, you're going to see hamstrings pulled, turf toes. Somebody's going to get a sore elbow. And the Milwaukee Brewers have put themselves in a position, I think, to overcome a lot of those injuries in a sprint as opposed to a marathon. Now, if this was a 162-game season, Hunter, I don't know that I would feel the exact same way. But in 60 games, I actually think Milwaukee is way better off than people are giving them credit for.
Oh, I like that as well. I think the depth will really play into it as the season goes on. I'm curious, Speaking of depth and how deep, the NL Central is really going to be competitive, I think, this year. Really, 4 out of 5 teams that can win the division. Maybe excluding the Pirates. I'm curious. Do you think, where do the Brewers stack up in this Central? Do you think kind of, are they first? Are they third, middle of the pack, or towards the bottom with the Pirates? Where are you seeing them in this 60-game season?
So I definitely see them within the top 3. They're in a 3-horse race, I think, to win the division. And I'm going to put it like this: Milwaukee, Cincinnati, St. Louis, not Chicago, surprisingly. But I'll tell you this: Chicago had one of the best managers in baseball last season.
Yep.
And the season prior, to that. One World Series with a roster that cost $250 million. David Ross has never managed a major league game in his life. During a global pandemic, David Ross is going to be tasked with leading one of the most expensive rosters in baseball. We know there are malcontents, or at least not malcontents, I shouldn't say that, but Chris Bryant would be open to moving on from Chicago. Okay, he would be open to moving out of there. So I don't consider the Cubs one of those top 3 teams. I think between Milwaukee, St. Louis, and Cincinnati, you're going to see one of those teams emerge as the NL Central champion and be a true player in the playoffs. I'm concerned about the Reds. Hunter, outside of Milwaukee, I'm concerned about the Reds. Their pitching staff, when you really look at it on paper, is one of the best in the entire majors, and they've still got reliable hitters. Joey Votto can still produce. Scooter Gennett, we remember what he could do. This team is going to be up and coming, and I think what they did last year, some of the moves Cincinnati made, put them in a really good position.
Yes, no, definitely. And they got Mike Moustakas from the Brewers, so we'll see if he fits into the mold.
I always forget about that. They got Mike Moustakas from the Brewers.
I know it's going to be sad to watch him in another uniform, unfortunately. But same with Grandal at the White Sox. And so the Brewers lost some of those keys, and the Reds picked up a key player like that. And like you said, the pitching is good as well. So if you had to pick one key to the Brewers succeeding in this 60-game season, whether it be the pitching staff, whether it be the lineup, whether it be coaching, what do you see as a big key this team has to have in order to succeed in this season?
Christian Yelich's health. If Christian Yelich can stay healthy and that knee is no longer an issue for him, which as we left last season, that was an issue for him. And right now, from what we understand, he's in a bit of a hitting slump. That's okay. It's spring training 2.0. But Christian Yelich's health would be number 1 for me. Number 2 would be Lorenzo Cain bounce back year. If Lorenzo Cain can play the way that he was playing a season or 2 ago, I think that this team is going to be in good shape.
Those are 2 great points, like you said. And you kind of forget Lorenzo Cain had a down year last year. Obviously, his defense is fantastic, but offensively, he was not as good as he was 2 years ago when they made that run in the postseason. So that is going to be a big key. Well, Dave, I really appreciate the couple minutes talking Brewers with me, and I got a great view there. It's going to be perfect for a Brewers season preview podcast because we got the view and everything as summer is in full swing.
Yeah, I'm tailgating early. I'm just getting myself mentally prepared for tailgating at Miller Park. At least one more season at Miller Park. I think we'll get a chance to get out there at some point. So,
yeah, well, I definitely hope so. Dave, really appreciate it, and talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.
That is Dave Carney. Once again, you can listen to him 6 to 9 a.m. on the WKTY Morning Show in La Crosse. Highly suggested, and he has always a fantastic show and really interesting takes. Always brings a ton of energy. So love having Dave Carney on the podcast, and looked like he was enjoying a nice summer day, didn't it? So always some great takes and interesting. He likes the Reds in the NL Central to be competitive, along with the Cubs and Cardinals, with the Brewers as well. So we shall see what happens, but always interesting takes from Dave Carney. So next, I want to get to Marc Carstens. He is a great friend of mine, and we worked together for a long time at RAQ Radio, which is the student radio station at UWL. He was a show host there, and also worked with me at WKTY. So let's get to Marc Carstens and see what he has to say about the Brewers. Joining us next on this Brewers season preview episode of the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast is Marc Carstens. He is a former WKTY La Crosse employee, also former show host on RAQ Radio, and recent UWL grad. First of all, congratulations on graduating, Marc, and great to talk Brewers today with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Hunter. I'm very excited to talk to you as well about the Brewers today. And thank you for acknowledging that my recent graduation from UWL. And it's a great feeling being a former UWL grad. And I know you're a recent UWL graduate as well. So you know how it is being a graduate now.
Absolutely. Yes. It's different graduating into a pandemic, but we're making it work. So that's been kind of the crazy part, but yeah, so we're both kind of in the same boat here as we go along. But today I want to focus on the Brewers, and I'm really interested to get your thoughts on this season. I'm glad we have baseball back coming up on Friday. So I'm interested in, first of all, 60 game season. It's going to be short. A lot of new players on this team. How many wins are you thinking for this Brewers team, and how do you think they'll fare in a 60-game season?
Yeah, Hunter. No, that's a great question, and I kind of see I was between 29 and 30 wins. So if I'm going to put an exact number, Hunter, I'm going to say 30 and 30. I just
Okay.
I see kind of an average type record. They have some great players and some phenomenal players on this team, like Christian Yelich and Josh Hader. And trying to think of a few, Ryan Braun's. I mean, I still consider
Yeah.
Ryan Braun a great player.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you look at like players like that. So they have players like that, but then they also have players like Orlando Arcia who are great defensively, but not so strong offensively, or a player like Omar Narvaez who's great at hitting, but really kind of struggles with the defensive side.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of looking at some players on this team, and I'm thinking like they have one strength, but then they have a weakness. So just through that, I see a solid team, but I just don't see a phenomenal team.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think we have to think about that. You know, you could have a good lineup, but is your defense going to be good enough? Or you could have a good defense, or is your offense going to be good enough? And so that balance, I think, is, like you said, is going to be tough for the Brewers, I think, to handle or to have throughout the season, because you have, like you said, and the Keston Hiura might be another example where you have a guy who's good at offensively, but defensively we know he makes many errors. So that's a good point, and that's kind of how you get to a 30 and 30 mark. I am curious, if they were to get into the postseason, do you think they can compete with some of these better teams like the Dodgers or the Braves in the NL if they were to get to a postseason?
That was exactly, I was writing that down in my notes, and I was saying I just don't see how they could get past the Atlanta Braves team or a Los Angeles Dodgers team, especially if it was a 7-game series in particular, Hunter. Then I really see it being an uphill battle and very challenging to be able to do that. Maybe in a 5-game series, I could see a potential possibility of an upset, but if it's a 7-game series, Hunter, I can't see the Brewers beating either one of those two teams.
Yeah. Sure. What gives you reservations about it? Is it the pitching, the hitting? What kind of makes you think, I don't know if this team can go up against these bigger guys, LA and Atlanta in this NL?
I just think the star player, like Atlanta and Los Angeles Dodgers, they have even more star players. Like the Brewers, I mean, have some, but they're just loaded with star players. The Braves and the Dodgers. I mean, you look at the Braves, and I'm looking at the Braves bullpen in particular for the Braves. Like, I mean, you have Mark Melancon in the bullpen. I mean, they picked up some players too from last year. I'm trying to think of. I know Mark Melancon is one of the ones that comes to mind.
Yeah, they have some younger guys too as well that have come up and done well.
But just their bullpen and kind of their pitching, I think for Atlanta is more the pitching. I just see being stronger than the Brewers, and then same with the Dodgers, kind of the pitching, and then with the Dodgers, it's just kind of everywhere. I mean, they just loaded at every position. I mean, you have Mookie Betts, Cody Bellinger, and then I mean, they just have a really good outfield in particular.
Yeah. Yep, they have it, top to bottom, and I think when you look at LA, it's like, okay, I think they have to be the favorites almost in the NL. Would you agree? I think it's like, yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a team where they've just got so much talent, and they got even better with getting Mookie Betts, and so yeah, that's going to be the team to watch, I think, in the NL. Final question for you. Christian Yelich, obviously you mentioned him as being one of the star players. We know he just signed this huge deal which we're all thankful for as Brewers fans. And I'm curious, if he wins, if he were to win an MVP, or he were to get a batting title, or even the home run title, do you think there's an asterisk by it because it's such a shortened season? Do you think it really counts as much as it would have had there been a full season? Where kind of do you stand on the whole, there will be an asterisk sort of thing for individual awards, like if Yelich would win an MVP?
I still think he would be certainly recognized for it. I think people in Milwaukee would say it's the MVP's an MVP. I mean, I think people in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area would still take it pretty similarly to a 162 game season. But if we're looking like as a whole, like the MLB community and like outside of the Brewers like fan base, then I would say for those fans, I think they would view it more as an asterisk, like not seeing it as like, oh, it's, yes, it's impressive he did it for 62 games, but would he have done all that in 162 games? So I think outside of the Brewers community fan base, I think there would be an asterisk, but in the Brewers fan base in the Milwaukee area, Wisconsin area, I think they would still view it similarly to how they would in a 162 game season and take it as an impressive, great accomplishment.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think a lot of people have said that even about the Bucks, like, right. Or like, some of these seasons that have gotten shortened, say the Packers season gets shortened, and the Packers end up winning the Super Bowl. Well, the Green Bay fans are going to say a Super Bowl is a Super Bowl, right? And then the rest of the fans are going to be like, well, no, it was a shortened season, blah, blah, blah. But the fans, whoever wins, if the Brewers win a World Series, they won a World Series, right? And so I think I think it's going to be the local fans, whoever it is going to say it's real or count.
Yes, exactly. No, that's really where I stand and feel about Yelich if he were to win an MVP or home run title.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Well, Mark, I really appreciate a couple minutes talking Brewers season preview. You got 30-30 for this team. We'll kind of see how that stacks up. I think I'm close to agreeing with you. I think they're going to be a team that is going to struggle at times. I think it's going to be an up and down year. I think with all these kind of the turnover of the roster, I think it's going to be more of an up and down year. So I agree with your assessment there. And it was great to talk Brewers with you. And we'll, for sure.
I was just actually talking to my dad earlier today, like text, and he was telling me about Ben Gamel and how he's been hearing about how he's been really doing great in spring training, and he's made massive improvements from last year with his hitting and fielding, and he's just doing really well. So I just wanted to add that in. Ben Gamel, that's a player to watch out for this year for the Milwaukee Brewers and making a step forward and an improvement.
That's a great that's a great point. I think he made some adjustments in the offseason with his swing or something as far as I read. And I think that could be big because they have, their outfield. Obviously you got Yelich, obviously you got Kane, but then that right field position is going to be interesting. Because you got Garcia, you've got got Ben Gamel, and then obviously Ryan Braun. So how they're gonna shuffle everybody will be interesting. But that's a great point about Ben Gamel. Well, Mark, I really appreciate it, and like I said, we'll talk soon. And go Brewers!
Well, thank you so much, Hunter. Take care, and yes, go Brewers! I totally agree, 100%.
Sounds good. Talk soon.
Talk soon, Hunter.
That is Marc Carstens. Once again, he just recently graduated from UWL and worked with me over at RAQ Radio, the student radio station, hosted a sports show there and worked at WKTY as well. So really fascinating takes from Mark, and great to introduce him to the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast audience as well. Well, we have one more guest for you, and it's a guy that's never been on the podcast either, and I'm really excited for you to get to meet him because he does fantastic work with reviewingthebrew.com, the same website David Gasper works for, and basically they write Brewers content. Okay. That is Marc Carstens. Once again, he is a recent UWL grad and worked with me at RAQ Radio at UWL, the student-run radio station there, and was a show host there, and also worked with me at WKTY in La Crosse. So really wanted to get his take as he follows the Wisconsin team super closely, and really wanted to get his take on how the Brewers will do this season. So it was great to talk to Mark. Final guest also is making their Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast debut on this episode of the Brewers season preview that we're doing, and it's Marc Carroll. He works with David Gasper over at reviewingthebrew.com, writes a lot of interesting articles. You can follow him on Twitter at MKEMatt13. Let's get to Marc Carroll. Our final guest on the Brewers season preview edition of the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast is Marc Carroll. Super excited to have him on the podcast. He works with David Gasper, who you saw a little earlier, and he's the site co-expert at reviewingthebrew.com. You can follow him on Twitter at MKEMatt13. Matt, appreciate you taking the time to come on my podcast today and talk some Brewers. We're excited for opening day here in a few days.
Yeah, thanks for having me always happy to talk Brewers.
Yes, for sure. And we love seeing your work on the reviewingthebrew.com. So first I want to ask you, how good do you see the Brewers being during the season? Kind of everything considered. If you had to put a number on how many wins they'll have this year, what's in your brain as far as that number of how many wins for a 60-game season that they'll have?
So it seems like most projections around the internet are kind of putting them and the other three top teams from the NL Central, the Cardinals, Cubs, and Reds, right around that 30 to 32 win range. I got them at 32. I think they're going to do well. I think the way their schedule is set up, even though it looks pretty tough in certain areas, actually will be good for Council to navigate. I think having the expanded rosters to start will allow him to kind of manage the team the way he does in September, or at least similar. And we all know how well he does that.
Yeah.
That will get him through the tough part of the schedule where you've got more road heavy series. You play teams like the Cubs, Cardinals, White Sox, and Twins. But he should be able to mitigate some of the risk just the way that he will go through that. Then once you're through that gauntlet, you get your home heavy schedule. You start to play some of the easier teams once the rosters pare down, and then he can, I think he'll be able to just kind of ride that, into the playoffs. We're all certainly hoping. I still have the Cards at the top. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but they're the same good team they were last year, though they did lose a major piece in Jordan Hicks. We'll see how that affects them. And then you never know what the Cubs are going to be like this year. I mean, yes, they were disappointing last year, but they still have all that talent. So depending on what they do, that'll determine a lot of what happens in the division. But put me down for 32 for the Brewers.
Yeah, 32 I think is a fair number for sure. I do want to focus with you a little bit on the infield because there's a bunch of different options and ways Craig Counsell could go with this. And I want to get your take. So there's like 12 infielders for four positions right now, obviously. So that's, you can't play everybody at once. So how do you see this infield shaking out, and who do you see playing the most at each position as we go around first base, second base, shortstop, and third base?
Yeah, I think start off with first base. I think Justin Smoke gets a majority of those starts. Yes, you'll have Braun in the mix. Yes, you'll probably have Logan Morrison in the mix to start at least. I think he makes the 30-man roster at the beginning. But Smoke is a big, impressive bat to have there in Miller Park. He is switch hitter, so you can play him against anyone. He doesn't necessarily have to platoon. That said, he is much better as a lefty. His career OPS is 100 points higher batting lefty versus righty. So that's where you're going to get the best value out of him, which is great because Braun's a right-handed hitter. So I think Smoke gets the most, especially since Braun will be in the mix at DH and right field as well. At second, it's going to be Keston Hiura. You'll have Holt in there, Brock Holt in there every once in a while. You may have Urias once he's actually able to play. But Hiura, we're going to be looking for him to, step up again and hopefully avoid a sophomore slump, but show a lot more of that impressive play that he showed last year. Shortstop starts off with Arcia. Orlando Arcia is going to get the most playing time at the beginning, and a lot of that is just because Luis Urias isn't going to be available. He's still coming back from being out for COVID. So, and that's going to set him back. That honestly could, depending on when he's able to actually come back, that could actually leave him off the active roster. So
that's true.
Until Arcia maybe goes through, if he goes through one of those slumps that he's known to, that's when you might see someone else in the mix. You have a Holt and an Eric Sogard who could, fill in where needed, but that's Arcia's to lose still at this point, I think. And third, man, I don't have a answer to who's going to get the most there. I think that's going to be a straight up platoon between Jed Jerko and Eric Sogard. You can go righty lefty with those two, just depending on who the starting pitcher is. Jerko is the one that I'm most excited for, I would say. He's that 2016-2017 with St. Louis. He had 50 homers combined over those 2 years, had OPS over 800 both years. So I think as long as he is back from those injuries, and he's shown some pop these last couple of
Yeah.
scrimmage games. So, I think that's a potential that's there, and that's why they brought him in. So, that's who I want to see. But Sogard had a solid year last year for Tampa. And again, once Urias is back, he can actually fill in at third base too. Holt can every once in a while as well. But all of that just goes to show the crazy amount of infield versatility that they have on this team.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to see what Council can do with it. You mentioned Orlando Arcia, and I'm curious, is this kind of a make or break year for Orlando Arcia? I know it's going to be a 60-game season. You're not going to get the sample size you usually do, but he's a guy he's been so up and down and struggling at the plate during his career. So where is this make or break for Arcia in 2020?
Yeah, honestly, I absolutely think it is. When you have a career 652 OPS, and 3 of your 4 seasons had a WAR, B WAR below 0.5, that's not going to cut it. Like, it doesn't matter how good you are defensively.
Yeah.
And he regressed a little bit in that sense last year too. So that certainly doesn't help his case. On top of that, you have a number now of shortstops waiting in the wing. You've got Luis Urias once he is able to, show what he's got. Your top price prospect in Bryce Terang is a shortstop. He's still a couple years out, but I mean, that's another potential backup at the position. And they also just drafted 2 shortstops. They took Freddie Zamora in the 2nd round, who a lot of scouts had seen as first-round talent before he went through his injury last year. And then Hayden Cantrell in the 5th, who was a little bit of a gift pick for them. A slow start that he didn't have the chance to come back from because of COVID shutting everything down, dropped him down the draft board. So that's 2 guys that, can start developing, and lots of options behind Arcia if he doesn't pull it together this year. He is making $2.2 million this year in his first year of arbitration. 2 years of arbitration left. If he's going to stick around that 650-ish OPS, you're not going to give him a raise to continue being your shortstop.
Right.
He's a prime non-tender candidate if he doesn't step it up. And he also has a minor league option left. So if he struggles this year, halfway through this year, that could be it. It could be time to send him down and see what Urias has, see what if Holt can fill in, or Sogard or something like that. So yes, he absolutely needs to prove himself this year if he wants to continue forward with Milwaukee.
I completely agree. He's Matt Carroll, co-site expert at Reviewing the Brew. You can find his work at reviewingthebrew.com. You can follow him on Twitter at MKEMatt13. Matt, really appreciate the time, and I'm excited for Brewers opening day, and I'm excited to see baseball again, aren't you?
Oh, man, let me tell you, these scrimmage games even have just been a gift. I've been absolutely loving them. Real baseball will be even better.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That is Matt Carroll. You can follow him on Twitter at MKEMatt13 and find his work at reviewingthebrew.com. Thanks to Matt for joining me, and thanks to all of our guests on this Brewers season preview edition of the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. Grant Bilse, Dave Carney, David Gasper, Marc Carstens. Thank you to everybody, and of course, Matt Carroll for joining me on this 2020 Brewers season preview. And I just want to offer my thoughts a little bit, and I think it's interesting. We had so many different perspectives. We had a great perspective on the DH with Grant Bilse and some of the lineups we could be looking at. Dave Carney is really high on the Reds, so I'm really interested to see how good they are, and I'll have my thoughts in a second. David Gasper talking about Corbin Burnes and how good he could be for this team. He could be the best. I think he could be the best 5th starter that anybody could have if he's really as good as he was in the scrimmages and as good as he was a couple of years ago. And then, of course, Matt Carroll with some really interesting stats and a great point about Orlando Arcia. Could be a great non-tender opportunity for him. And I think for him, or with Orlando Arcia, he had some great points about this really is a make or break year for him. We've seen so much up and down, and a lot of down more than up, and so it doesn't matter how good defensively, like he said, if you can't get it going offensively, it's not good. And of course, Marc Carstens with a couple of great points about the idea of the asterisk, right? Because that is, everybody's talking about that, especially as well with the Milwaukee Bucks, is will the season have an asterisk between, will they have it if they win a title, if will Yelich have it if he wins MVP, a batting title, will there be a, well, it doesn't really count attitude? And I think Marc Carstens had a great point. It'll count to the people in the city, right? If the Brewers win the World Series, it'll count for the Brewers fans. They'll count it. If the Bucks win a championship, they'll count it. But of the rest of the leagues, I'm not really sure if they'll count it exactly how you would a normal season because of all the disruptions. But we shall see. I also want to talk about quickly give you my take. I think the Brewers could win about 33, 34 games. I know a couple of people thought about 30 to 32 in the podcast. I think that's really good. I think it's going to be a very balanced win some, lose some season. I don't see them going like 40 and 20. I don't see them going 20 and 40. I think it's somewhere in between there, and I think 33, 34 wins. Maybe that might be high. I don't know. I think what Mark brought up as well about the balance of offense and defense. You have a lot of players that are good at one thing, but are they as good are they good at offense, but maybe they're bad at defense? Are they bad at defense, but maybe they're good at offense? Those kind of things and how they'll work, it will be interesting to watch because there's a lot of players on this team that are good at one side, hitting or fielding, and maybe not at the other. We've seen Keston Hiura as a good example of that. Arcia is the opposite of Hiura, good at defense, so at the offensive side, right? Christian Yelich obviously is the end-all be-all because he's good at both. But and there's a wide range in between. So I think that kind of lends yourself to a 33-34 win. The pitching is going to be big. As far as the NL Central goes, I think it's going to be interesting because I'm not as high on the Reds as other people. I think they made some good moves. I think their pitching is good. I think it'll be very good, very solid. I think the Cubs bounce back this year. I really do. I think under the new management of David Ross, I think he's going to have the effect that Craig Counsell had the effect on the Brewers. And what I mean by that is a guy who played for the team. He knows how the team works. He has spent a bunch of time in those clubhouses, on that field, and I think that really is going to help David Ross, and he's going to be able to connect with the players really well in his first year with Chicago. Not only that, they have a lot of talent on that team, as some of our guests alluded to. They still have talent, and I think we can't forget that when it comes down to the Chicago Cubs. So I say the Chicago Cubs actually win this division this year. As a Brewers fan, it hurts me to say it. I think the Brewers, they'll battle for it. I think the Brewers could win it. It depends on maybe a couple of games, but I think the Cubs, the Brewers, the Cardinals are your top three, and I think the Reds are still fourth. They could maybe hop into third, but I think it's Cubs, Brewers, Cardinals, and then Reds, and then Pirates is how the NL Central fits. But we shall see. And like I said, I'm just not as high in the Reds as other people. But maybe I'm just naive, and maybe my more mindset is they haven't been good, so why should I expect they're going to be good this year? Maybe that's my mindset. I'll see it when I believe it kind of deal. So we shall see. I'm excited just for baseball. The Brewers, the Cubs, Wrigley Field, Friday night, 6:10 opening night, and of course they've got a weekend series in Wrigley against the Cubs, and that will show how are they against other competition. I'm excited to see it, and of course just see baseball. I think a sense of normalcy, as we've talked about with a couple of guests today, is it's going to be nice to get back into routine. Grant Bilse talked about it. He's going to have a game to talk about every day on his show, and just get back into that routine of seeing it on TV, hearing it on the radio. I think that sense of normalcy is very important, I think, for a lot of people right now. And it kind of shows, if we can get this under control, and be better, overall, and help our fellow man, wear masks, all that kind of stuff, we can get to a world that's back to normal. And I think eventually we'll get there. It won't be soon necessarily, but I think eventually we'll get there. And I think we can all learn something from sports coming back, maybe in that respect of, we can get to a normal state again. Don't worry. But it's going to take kind of all of our efforts, and I think we can do that. So thank you so much for watching or listening. Remember, you can watch the podcast on YouTube, or you can listen on SoundCloud. Simply search Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. Really appreciate all the guests today. It was a long podcast because I want to get a lot of people on the episode. Thanks to Matt Carroll. Thanks to David Gasper. Thanks to Dave Carney. Thanks to Grant Bilse. Thanks to Marc Carstens, all with fantastic points about the Milwaukee Brewers. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you enjoyed my points as well at the end too. But either way, hope you enjoyed the guests more, because they're the guys that come on and agree to come on to this podcast. So I appreciate all of them. And we'll talk to you again next week. In the meantime, enjoy opening day. Enjoy the last full week of July. Like, what in the world? I mean, I think the time is going real fast, even though, it maybe is going slow in some respects because nothing's going on. But I don't know. To me, it's going real fast. Anyway, talk to you next week. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HunterBOnAir. Feel free to like the Facebook page as well, Hunter Baumgardt Sports. We'll have all the updates on the podcast there. And as always, stay positive.